they thought I was dead. They pulled a body from the river and decided it was mine. And while I was still breathing, my husband opened champagne. If you're listening to me right now, I want you to sit with that for a second. Not the drama of it, just the logistics. Papers filed. A wake scheduled. My sister standing beside him in black silk, wearing my gold bangles like they were borrowed from a closet instead of peeled off my dresser. I didn't scream when I walked into my own funeral. I waited. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that morning, or no, the night before. It was late. I remember the kitchen clock blinking 11:40, or maybe 11:17. It was one of those times that looks later than it feels. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the low vibration of my husband Daniel's phone against the marble countertop. He said he had an early meeting. That's what he said. We'd been married 22 years. Or 21. I always round up in my head. It felt longer than the number suggested, not in a bad way. Just layered. Mortgage papers, PTA meetings, anniversary dinners at the same Italian restaurant with the chipped blue plates. It was a solid life. That's what I believed. I ran a small interior design firm out of our home office. Nothing flashy. Clients who liked neutral palettes and safe choices. Daniel worked in private equity. Clean suits. Polished shoes. The kind of man who folded his socks before putting them in the drawer. My sister Lila lived across town. Younger by 4 years. Always the brighter one in photographs. She'd drop by unannounced sometimes with pastries or gossip or some new man she was done with forever but would absolutely text again. Family felt stable. Predictable. And predictable can be comforting when you're in your 40s and the world feels louder than it did at 20. That night, Daniel didn't kiss me goodnight. Not properly. Just a distracted press of lips to my temple. His phone buzzed again. He turned it face down. I noticed. But I didn't investigate. You tell yourself long marriages earn privacy. You don't want to become that woman, the one who scrolls through messages in the bathroom light. You want to be dignified. You want to trust the structure you helped build. So I went to bed. The next morning, I drove out toward the lake house. It belonged to a client. She wanted me to look at drapery options. It was raining. Not dramatic rain. Just steady, gray sheets against the windshield. I remember thinking I should turn back. There was a heaviness in my chest, not fear exactly. More like reluctance. But adults don't cancel appointments because of vague feelings. So I kept driving. The bridge was slick. That's the last clear image I have, the guardrail rushing toward me, water below, and my own hands tightening on the steering wheel. After that, fragments. Cold. Metal. A smell like gasoline and wet leaves. I didn't go into the river. Someone else did. The police assumed it was me because my car was found near the embankment, crushed against the railing. A body had been recovered downstream hours earlier. Female. Similar height. Similar hair color. They didn't check dental records immediately. That part still surprises me. Daniel identified the body through a closed casket recommendation. Too damaged, they told him. He agreed without pushing. That detail matters. I wasn't dead. I'd crawled out the passenger side window when the car slid sideways and lodged into the barrier instead of plunging fully in. I stumbled down the embankment in shock and hit my head on something. I still have the faint ridge near my hairline. A passing trucker found me walking barefoot along the shoulder 2 miles away. I told him my name. I'm sure I did. But by the time I reached the hospital, concussion fog had wrapped everything in cotton. They listed me as Jane Doe. It took 2 days for the confusion to surface. 2 full days before someone compared fingerprints. 2 days before I learned that my husband had already planned a wake. And that my sister had helped him choose the wine. When I finally got my phone back, cracked screen, water damaged, there were 36 missed calls from Daniel. All within the first 12 hours after the accident. Then silence. That's the part that stayed with me. Silence. By the time I was discharged, the wake was scheduled for Saturday evening. Friends flying in. Caterers booked. A slideshow prepared. I should have called. I should have driven straight home and thrown open the door. Instead, I rented a car under my maiden name and checked into a motel 15 miles away. I wanted to see something first. I needed to know whether what I felt rising in my chest was grief, or something colder. So I waited. And on Saturday evening, I walked into my own wake. They were laughing. Before the accident, before the river and the paperwork and the closed casket, my life looked orderly. Not glamorous. Not chaotic. Just structured in a way that made sense to me. Our house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac lined with sycamores that dropped bark like curled parchment every summer. Cream siding. Navy shutters. The porch light always worked because Daniel replaced bulbs the same day they burned out. Inside, everything had its place. My design influence was subtle, layered textures, soft lighting, books stacked horizontally on the coffee table because I liked how it grounded the room. It felt lived in. Safe. Daniel and I had routines that ran like clockwork. He made coffee at 6:10 every morning. 2 scoops. French press. I watered the herbs on the kitchen windowsill while the kettle hissed. We'd exchange small updates, who was picking up dry cleaning, whose turn it was to call his mother. We weren't dramatic people. That's important to understand. We had weathered things. Financial strain during the recession. A miscarriage early in our marriage. I don't talk about that often, and even now I hesitate because memory can soften edges, but I remember the hospital room smelling like antiseptic and lemon cleaner. Daniel held my hand the entire time. Or maybe he stepped out once to call someone. I can't recall exactly. But I believed he stayed. That belief mattered more than the detail. Lila, my sister, had always orbited our life in bursts. She'd arrive in a swirl of perfume and loud opinions, toss her purse on the kitchen island, and open the refrigerator without asking. She teased Daniel about being too serious. He'd smile in that polite, contained way of his. They got along. I never thought twice about it. We did holidays together. Sunday dinners sometimes. Lila preferred champagne to wine. Daniel kept a bottle chilled for her visits. I thought that was considerate. Now, looking back, I replay moments. Small ones. A glance that lasted a fraction too long. A joke that landed in a tone I didn't quite recognize. But at the time, I saw none of it because I wasn't looking. And here's something I've been turning over in my mind: when you've built a life brick by brick, do you ever really examine the foundation again? Or do you just assume the ground beneath you hasn't shifted? Tell me honestly, have you ever trusted something simply because it had been there for years? Drop that in the comments. Not for engagement. For perspective. I want to know if stability ever fooled you too. About 6 months before the accident, Daniel began traveling more. Client dinners, he'd say. Investor retreats. His suits came back smelling faintly different. Not perfume, exactly. More like hotel soap. I told myself I was imagining it. I didn't confront him. I didn't check bank statements. There was one evening, I remember standing at the sink, hands in warm dishwater, when his phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with Lila's name. It wasn't unusual. They texted about family things sometimes. But it was late. After 11. I wiped my hands and glanced at the preview notification. Can't wait to celebrate. That was the message. Celebrate what? I almost called out to him, but he was upstairs in the shower. The water was running hard. Steam curling under the bathroom door. I let it go. I told myself it was probably about her promotion. Or some new project. See how quickly the mind supplies comfort? I wasn't naive. I was invested. There's a difference. 2 weeks before the accident, Daniel suggested updating our wills. Just practical, he said. We're not getting younger. We met with our attorney, Mr. Halvorson, tall, narrow face, wire-rimmed glasses. The office smelled like paper and old wood polish. Daniel insisted on equal distribution clauses, survivor provisions. Standard things. I signed without reading every line. That part still unsettles me. I trusted him with numbers. He handled investments. Retirement accounts. I focused on design contracts and client palettes. We divided responsibilities the way couples do when they assume permanence. And Lila, she was present at more dinners that month than usual. Bringing desserts. Staying late. Laughing in that sharp, chiming way of hers. One night, I caught Daniel watching her while she talked. Not admiring exactly. More, assessing. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. I told myself I imagined it. Or maybe I didn't want to name what I saw. Stability can be blinding. The week of the accident, I felt restless. I rearranged the living room twice. Changed out throw pillows for no reason. Lila came by Wednesday afternoon with eclairs from that bakery downtown, the one with the striped awning. I can't remember the name. It's right there on the corner of Maple and Cedar? No. Elm. Anyway. She hugged me longer than usual. I remember that clearly. Her perfume lingered on my sweater after she left. Daniel came home early that night. They both seemed buoyant. I noticed. But I didn't ask. Because asking would have required me to believe something was wrong. And I wasn't ready for that. The night before the accident, when his phone buzzed again and he turned it face down, a thin thread of unease tightened inside me. Not enough to unravel the whole sweater. Just enough to itch. I could have picked it up. I didn't. When I drove toward that bridge the next morning, I believed I was heading to a client meeting in a stable life, married to a dependable man, loved by a loyal sister. That was the version of reality I carried with me. And it was about to split open. I just didn't know which side of it I would land on. When I walked into that wake, no one screamed. They froze. That's the part people always imagine differently, dramatic gasps, someone fainting into a floral arrangement. It wasn't like that. The room simply stalled. Glasses suspended midair. A fork paused halfway to someone's mouth. Then the music kept playing. Soft jazz. I remember that detail because it felt absurd. I stayed near the doorway at first. The rented black dress I'd bought that afternoon still had a faint crease down the front. My hair was pulled back low. I hadn't bothered with much makeup. Concussion headaches don't cooperate with vanity. Daniel saw me after maybe 5 seconds. His face drained in a way that didn't look like grief. It looked like calculation. Lila was standing beside him. She was wearing my gold bangles. Not similar ones. Mine. I recognized the small scratch near the clasp where I'd caught it on a drawer handle years ago. She held a champagne flute in her left hand, wrist tilted slightly outward like she was posing without meaning to. I didn't rush forward. I didn't accuse. I just watched. And in those first quiet seconds, I noticed something that mattered more than shock. They weren't mourning. The room wasn't heavy. It was celebratory. Low laughter. Catered trays moving through the crowd. A slideshow playing on the wall, photos from vacations, holidays, my 40th birthday dinner where Daniel had toasted a lifetime together. He approached me slowly. Camora, he said, like he was testing the word. Not oh my god. Not my nickname. Just my name. Lila set her glass down too carefully. That's how I remember it, deliberate. The way someone moves when they're buying time. You're alive, she whispered. It wasn't joy. It was disruption. I felt something shift in my chest then, not pain exactly. More like a piece sliding into place. A puzzle shape I hadn't known was missing. I said, calmly, yes. Someone behind them muttered, "Is this a joke?" That's when the murmurs started. Phones lifted. A woman from our church crossed herself. The caterer backed toward the kitchen. Daniel reached for my arm. I stepped back. It wasn't dramatic. Just instinct. He tried again. "They told us." "I know what they told you," I said. And I did. The hospital had filled in the timeline. The body found in the river. The rushed identification. The paperwork. The closed casket recommendation. But here's the thing that began to bother me: Daniel hadn't insisted on seeing the body. He hadn't asked for confirmation beyond what they offered. 22 years married, no, 21, and he accepted a sealed coffin. That detail kept echoing. The attorney, Mr. Halvorsen, was there too. I hadn't noticed him at first. He stood near the fireplace holding a folder. His eyes were wide behind his glasses. That's when I remembered something else. The will. 3 days before the accident, no, it was 4, Daniel had asked to meet with Halvorsen alone after our joint appointment. He said it was about tax efficiency. I didn't question it. Standing in that room, alive and very much breathing, I wondered what had been discussed. I scanned the space slowly. The champagne. The catered shrimp trays. Lila wearing my jewelry. The slideshow looping with photos that felt curated, almost like a highlight reel of a life neatly packaged. It didn't feel rushed. It felt prepared. Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Let's step outside. Please." His tone wasn't pleading. It was controlled. That unsettled me more than anything. I walked toward the patio doors without answering. He followed. Lila stayed inside. I caught her watching us through the glass, fingers twisting the edge of her dress. Outside, the air smelled like damp leaves and expensive cologne. The sun was dipping behind the trees, casting everything in that golden light that makes even uncomfortable scenes look cinematic. "Camora," Daniel began, "we were devastated." I held his gaze. "You seemed busy," I said. He blinked. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer immediately. I watched a neighbor from across the street peeking through the hedge. "People love spectacle." "I saw the text," I said finally. He stiffened. Just slightly. "What text?" "Can't wait to celebrate." Silence. He recovered quickly. "That was about Lila's promotion." Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I couldn't tell if I was searching for betrayal or finally allowing myself to see it. That's the complicated part: once suspicion enters the room, it rearranges the furniture. And here's where the fork in the road appeared. I could confront them both right there. Demand explanations. Pull the thread hard and see what unraveled. Or I could step back. Observe. Verify before accusing. Because if I was wrong, if grief had simply taken strange shapes, I would destroy something permanent. But if I was right, I needed proof. Standing there on my own patio, alive at my own wake, I realized trust and evidence were no longer the same thing. And I had to decide which one I was willing to live without. I didn't confront them that night. That surprised even me. Instead, I did something quieter. I walked back inside, thanked a few stunned guests for coming, told them there had been a mistake at the hospital, and suggested everyone take a plate home so the food wouldn't go to waste. My voice didn't shake. My hands did. Slightly. Daniel stayed close but didn't touch me again. Lila avoided my eyes. She busied herself collecting empty glasses like she was suddenly hired staff. I watched her wrists as she moved. My bangles caught the light. That image anchored itself in me. When the house finally emptied, Daniel locked the front door and turned to face me. The living room smelled like shrimp cocktail and extinguished candles. My funeral slideshow still glowed silently against the wall. "You need to sit," he said. "I'm fine." I wasn't fine. But I needed clarity more than comfort. He began explaining the confusion, the police, the identification, the shock. His sentences were structured. Logical. Almost rehearsed. I let him talk. At one point he said, I was in no state to think clearly. That line snagged. Because earlier, outside, he had seemed very clear. Lila stood near the staircase, arms folded tight across her chest. "We thought you were gone," she said. "You have no idea what that did to us." I looked at her. "No," I said slowly. "I don't." And that was true. I didn't know what it did to them. But I intended to find out. That night, Daniel slept in the guest room at my suggestion. I said I needed quiet. He didn't argue. I lay awake listening to the house settle, the faint tick of pipes cooling, the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Every familiar sound felt slightly foreign, like I'd returned from a long trip and something subtle had shifted. Around 2 a.m., I got up. I walked barefoot into Daniel's office. The desk was tidy. Too tidy. His laptop sat closed in the center, aligned perfectly with the edge of the wood. I opened it. It required a password I didn't know. That gave me pause. We'd never locked devices from each other before. Or maybe we had and I just hadn't noticed. No. I would have noticed. I tried our anniversary date. Nothing. I tried Lila's birthday. The screen unlocked. I actually froze for a second. I hadn't expected that to work. I thought I was guessing wildly. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he reused numbers. Still. My sister's birthday. The desktop background was a photo of us from a beach trip 2 summers ago. I stared at it longer than necessary, studying Daniel's expression in the image. It's strange how photographs feel like evidence once doubt exists. I opened his email. There weren't obvious love letters. No dramatic confessions. Instead, there were transfers. Account notifications. Wire confirmations. Large sums. To an account I didn't recognize. I checked the name attached to it. Lila's legal name. My throat tightened, not in a poetic way. It felt mechanical, like my airway had narrowed. I clicked through dates. Transfers had begun 3 months earlier. Incremental at first. Then larger. One line item from 2 days before the accident read, "Final distribution pending." Final. Distribution. I leaned back in the chair. The leather creaked under my weight. My mind tried to assemble explanations, loans, investments, helping her start something new. But why not tell me? Why hide it behind meetings and password walls? I checked the documents folder. There it was. A revised will. Dated the day before my accident. The survivor clause had changed. If I died, the majority of my assets, including the house, would transfer to Daniel, obviously. That was expected. But a secondary clause now named Lila as beneficiary in the event of his inability to manage the estate. Inability. The wording felt clinical. I reread it twice. No, 3 times. And then something colder settled in my stomach. The kind of realization that doesn't explode. It seeps. They had been positioning themselves. For what, exactly? I wasn't sure yet. But it wasn't spontaneous grief planning. It was strategy. I remember sitting there thinking, maybe I'm misinterpreting this. Maybe this is estate planning nuance I don't understand. I'm not a lawyer. I design rooms for a living. Fabric swatches, not legal traps. Still. Why her birthday is the password? Why the transfers? Why the urgency? I closed the laptop carefully and returned to bed before Daniel woke. The next morning, I acted normal. Coffee at 6:10. Herbs watered. Routine maintained. He watched me over the rim of his mug, searching my face for something. I gave him nothing. Later that afternoon, I drove to Mr. Halvorson's office unannounced. He looked startled when I walked in, more startled than he had at the wake. "I need to see the most recent documents," I said. He hesitated. That hesitation confirmed more than any sentence could. "Camora," he began, adjusting his glasses, "there were discussions about protecting assets in case of..." "In case of what?" He stopped. I let the silence stretch. Finally, he admitted that Daniel had expressed concern about my recent instability. He claimed I'd been overwhelmed, distracted, at risk of making poor financial decisions. I actually laughed at that. It wasn't hysterical. It was sharp. Unstable. Because I rearranged throw pillows? Because I hesitated at a bridge in the rain? I walked out of that office knowing something irreversible had shifted. The lowest point wasn't discovering the money. It wasn't the revised will. It was realizing that two people who shared my history had quietly begun rewriting my future without me. And I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. If you've ever uncovered betrayal piece by piece instead of all at once, you know how disorienting that feels. Share it if you want. Not to relive it, but to remind yourself you survived it. That night, sitting alone in my car in a grocery store parking lot, I understood one thing clearly. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. Preparation doesn't look dramatic. It looks like spreadsheets. It looks like calm breathing in a parked car while the engine ticks as it cools. That evening in the grocery store lot, I didn't cry. I opened my notes app and began listing facts. Not suspicions. Facts. Password, Lila's birthday. Wire transfers over 3 months. Revised will dated 1 day before accident. Daniel's claim of my instability. Seeing it in plain text steadied me. Facts don't panic. I drove home slowly. The sunset was flat and orange, like someone had lowered the saturation on the sky. I remember thinking how ordinary everything looked. Neighbors mowing lawns. A dog barking behind a fence. My life was imploding quietly. Inside, Daniel was at the kitchen island with his laptop open. He glanced up. "You went out," he said. "Yes." That was all. He studied me. I could feel it without looking. He was measuring something, my tone, my posture, whether I'd found anything. I kept my movements deliberate. Set my keys down. Washed my hands. Took a glass from the cabinet. The ordinary choreography of domestic life can be a shield. Later that night, I lay awake again, but this time not confused. Strategic. I realized something important: they believed I was unaware. And that was an advantage. If I confronted them now, they would scramble. Move money. Adjust documents. Build narratives. If I stayed silent, they would assume control. And control makes people careless. The next morning, no, it was 2 mornings later, I called my bank directly. Not the joint account manager Daniel used. A separate branch. I asked for a private appointment. The woman who met with me had short gray hair and a firm handshake. I appreciated that. I requested full access logs to our accounts and copies of any recent changes. She raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "Possibly," I said. I didn't elaborate. Over the next week, I gathered documentation. Quietly. I scanned statements. Photographed the revised will at Halvorson's office under the pretense of reviewing it. I even requested a cognitive evaluation from my doctor, a standard assessment, documented and dated, to preempt any narrative about instability. That decision felt extreme. But necessary. There was a moment, sitting in the sterile exam room while the nurse asked me to recall 3 words after 5 minutes, when I almost laughed at the absurdity. I wasn't losing my memory. I was protecting it. And here's something I wrestled with: was I overreacting? Were the transfers simply loans to Lila? Was the will revision clumsy but not malicious? I had to confront the possibility that grief and concussion were distorting my perception. I didn't want to become paranoid. So I verified everything twice. The transfers weren't loans. There were no repayment schedules. No notes. Just movement of funds. The revised clause about Daniel's inability was broad. It allowed Lila significant discretion. Discretion over my estate. That word lingered. One evening, Lila stopped by unannounced again. She brought wine. Red this time. I feel like things have been tense, she said, settling onto the couch. I watched her closely. Her nails were painted a deep burgundy. One of my throw pillows rested behind her back, the linen one I'd imported from Italy. I noticed small details because big ones were overwhelming. We've all been through a shock, she continued. Yes, I said. She reached for my hand. I let her. Her palm was warm. Steady. I would never hurt you, she said softly. There it was. Not we. Not Daniel. Just her. I know, I replied. And here's where I need to admit something: in that moment, a part of me wanted to believe her. Wanted this entire thing to collapse into misunderstanding. Because if it was deliberate, if it was calculated, then the betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was sustained. After she left, I stood in the hallway staring at the family photos on the wall. Birthdays. Vacations. Matching sweaters one Christmas that Daniel insisted on as a joke. I wondered when the shift had begun. Had there been a single decision? A single line crossed? Or had it grown slowly, like mold behind drywall, hidden until the structure weakened? By the end of that week, I had enough documentation to act. I scheduled a meeting with a separate attorney. One Daniel had never used. A woman named Patricia Klein, sharp eyes, minimal jewelry, direct questions. I laid everything out. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "Do you want to protect yourself quietly, or confront this head-on?" That was the crossroads. Quiet protection meant restructuring assets, freezing certain accounts, revising my own will, without alerting Daniel. Confrontation meant exposure. Consequences. Public unraveling. I drove home from that meeting feeling heavier than I had at my own wake. Because this choice wasn't about catching them. It was about deciding who I wanted to be in response. Some of you might say immediate confrontation is strength. Others might argue strategic withdrawal is smarter. So let me ask you, when trust fractures, do you demand answers right away, or do you secure your footing first? There's no clean answer. I chose control. And once I chose it, I didn't hesitate. I didn't raise my voice. I changed the locks. Not dramatically. Not in the middle of the night. I waited until Daniel left for work on a Tuesday morning, or maybe it was Wednesday. The days blurred that week. I remember the trash trucks rumbling down the street, so it might have been Tuesday. Doesn't matter. What matters is that by noon, every exterior lock had been replaced. I'd already moved half our liquid assets into a protected account under a legal separation filing Patricia drafted quietly. Temporary. Strategic. Documented. By 3 o'clock, Daniel's access to the primary investment portfolio was frozen pending review. He called at 3:12 p.m. What did you do? Straight to it. I secured my estate, I said. Silence. Then, sharper, you had no right. I almost corrected him. Almost reminded him whose name sat beside his on every document. But I didn't waste breath. You revised the will without disclosure, I said. You transferred substantial funds to my sister. It was temporary. Then you won't mind the pause. He hung up. An hour later, Lila arrived. She didn't knock softly this time. She pounded. I opened the door but kept the chain latched. Her face was flushed. Not with embarrassment. With anger. "You're making this ugly," she said. I studied her expression. There was fear there too. Underneath. Was it supposed to be beautiful? I asked. She stepped back slightly, like she hadn't expected resistance. "It wasn't what you think," she insisted. Daniel was trying to protect things. "From me?" She hesitated. That was enough. "You told Halvorsen I was unstable," I said evenly. "That's not." I have the transcript of the meeting notes. That wasn't entirely true. I had summaries. But it worked. Her shoulders dropped. For a split second, just one, I saw calculation evaporate and something raw take its place. "You were different," she said quietly. Distracted. He thought. He thought what? I pressed. That if something happened again. Again. The word hung there. Again. They had gamed scenarios. That's when the final piece locked in. This wasn't about grief. It was contingency planning. For my absence. I unlatched the chain and opened the door fully. "Come inside," I said. She stepped in slowly. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later. He must have driven fast. His tie was loosened, hair slightly disheveled. We stood in the living room, the same room where my funeral slideshow had played. No raised voices. No shattered glass. Just three adults facing what they'd built. "I was restructuring assets," Daniel began, hands open like he was presenting a spreadsheet. "In case your health declined." "My health?" I repeated. "You've been forgetful," he said. "Emotional." I actually smiled. "Because I rearranged pillows?" "That's not fair." "Neither is rewriting my estate." Lila stepped in. "It wasn't about hurting you." "Then why hide it?" Neither answered. The air felt dense. Even the house seemed to hold still. "I survived," I said finally. "That's the inconvenient part for you." Daniel flinched. "If you're suggesting." "I'm stating facts." I slid a folder across the coffee table. Bank statements. Transfer logs. A copy of the revised will. Documentation of my cognitive evaluation, signed and dated. "You built a narrative," I said. "I built evidence." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Maybe I was. Maybe freezing accounts and filing preliminary separation papers seemed extreme from the outside. If you're listening and thinking I should have talked it through first, I understand that reaction. Truly. But tell me, how do you discuss contingency plans for your own erasure? You don't. You act. "I filed for legal separation," I said calmly. "Effective immediately. Asset review pending." Lila inhaled sharply. "Camorra." "No." One word. "Firm." "You don't get to soften this." Daniel's voice dropped. "You're destroying our marriage." I met his eyes. "No," I said. "You did that when you planned for my disappearance." The room went quiet again. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked. Ordinary sounds. Inside, something final settled. Daniel gathered the documents slowly. "This isn't over," he said. "I know," I replied. But it was over in the way that mattered. He left without another word. Lila lingered by the door. "I never wanted to replace you," she whispered. "Replace. Interesting choice." "You already tried," I said. She didn't argue. When the door closed behind her, the house felt larger. Echoing. Not empty, just recalibrated. I stood there for a long time. Breathing. Not shaking. Just steady. The confrontation hadn't been explosive. It had been surgical. And once the incision was made, there was no stitching it back together. The house sounded different after they left. Not quieter, just different. When two people move through a space for decades, they leave a rhythm behind. The scrape of a chair. The cadence of footsteps on the stairs. Daniel had a habit of clearing his throat before speaking, like he was preparing a presentation even in casual conversation. That sound was gone. In the first week after the separation filing, I kept expecting to hear his car in the driveway at 6:40 p.m. My body still tracked the schedule even when the calendar had changed. Habits linger. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's muscle memory reaching for something that isn't there. I moved slowly through the house. Not rearranging this time. Just observing. The indent in his side of the mattress. The row of suits in the closet, still aligned by color. I left them untouched for several days, maybe it was longer. I lose track of small timelines when I'm tired. Eventually, I boxed them. Not angrily. Methodically. Lila texted twice during that first month. The first message, "Can we talk?" The second, "I miss you." I didn't respond immediately. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. I needed to understand what I felt before I spoke. And here's something that surprised me, I didn't feel explosive anger. I felt thinning. Like a rope that had been fraying slowly and finally separated into strands. There's pain in that. But also relief. Friends chose sides quietly. Some called Daniel first. Some called me. A few avoided both of us, as if conflict were contagious. At church, people looked at me with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. One woman squeezed my hand a little too tightly and whispered, "You're so strong." I'm not sure that was strength. It was necessity. Patricia moved efficiently. Asset reviews confirmed what I suspected, significant transfers, poorly justified. The legal process wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork and waiting rooms and signatures. Daniel didn't fight aggressively. That part still puzzles me. Maybe he knew the documentation was too clear. Or maybe he was tired too. We sold the house 3 months later. I stood in the empty living room on closing day, sunlight pouring across bare hardwood floors, and tried to catalog what had been lost. The marriage, obviously. The easy version of sisterhood. Certain shared memories now felt contaminated, beach trips, holiday dinners. I found myself questioning photographs, wondering what was happening just outside the frame. But not everything dissolved. My business survived. In fact, it grew. There's something grounding about choosing fabrics and furniture when your personal life feels unmoored. Clients don't care about your separation papers. They care about whether the sofa fits through the doorway. I appreciated that simplicity. I rented a smaller house across town. 2 bedrooms. A narrow backyard with uneven grass. The first night there, I sat on the floor with takeout containers and realized I felt lighter. Lonely. But lighter. I won't pretend there weren't moments of doubt. There were evenings when I wondered if I'd escalated too quickly. If a long conversation might have untangled things without lawyers involved. Would I act the same way again? I've asked myself that more than once. If I'd confronted them earlier, before gathering documentation, would the outcome have shifted? Or would I have been gaslit into apologizing for suspicion? I don't know. That uncertainty humbles me. There are no clean moral victories in situations like this. Only consequences you choose to live with. Daniel and I finalized the divorce quietly. No public spectacle. Lila didn't attend the final hearing, though she sent a short email wishing me peace. Peace is an interesting word when it arrives from someone who helped disturb it. I haven't seen her in person since the day of the confrontation. Sometimes I replay that moment when she said, "I never wanted to replace you." I still don't fully understand what that meant. Replace me emotionally? Financially? Symbolically? Maybe all three. And maybe she doesn't fully understand it either. What permanently changed wasn't just my relationship with them. It was my relationship with assumption. I no longer accept stability at face value. I read documents thoroughly. I ask questions that feel uncomfortable. Not because I'm suspicious of everyone, I'm not, but because I learned that love without clarity can be quietly rewritten. There's a difference between trust and passivity. I confused the two for years. Sometimes, late at night in this smaller house, I sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and think about the version of me who drove toward that bridge believing everything was intact. I don't miss her innocence. But I respect her effort. She built something real, even if others tried to repurpose it. And if you're listening and reflecting on choices you made under pressure, ask yourself gently, were you protecting your dignity or your comfort? They're not always the same. I chose dignity. It cost me. But it left me standing. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes after the noise settles. Not triumph. Not bitterness. Just clarity. It's been a little over a year now, no, closer to 18 months. I had to think about that. Time stretches differently when you measure it in legal documents and new routines instead of anniversaries. I still pass the old neighborhood sometimes. Not intentionally. It's just on the way to a supplier I use for custom upholstery. The sycamores still shed bark in the summer. The porch light probably still works. Daniel was always meticulous about maintenance. I don't feel the sharp twist in my chest anymore when I drive by. I feel perspective. Here's what I've learned: betrayal isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with lipstick on a collar or secret hotel receipts left in a coat pocket. Sometimes it looks like contingency planning. Like paperwork filed quietly. Like someone deciding they know what's best for you without your consent. And the most unsettling part? It can be done by people who once held your hand in hospital rooms. I don't hate Daniel. That surprises some people when I say it. But hate is heavy, and I've carried enough weight. What I feel instead is distance. A clear, clean line where intimacy used to be. As for Lila, that one took longer to untangle. Sisters share history in layers, childhood bedrooms, bar of clothes, whispered secrets after lights out. Losing that isn't the same as losing a spouse. It's losing a mirror. Sometimes I question whether forgiveness is necessary for peace. Do we forgive to free them, or to free ourselves? I haven't decided fully. I'm still sitting with that. And I want to ask you something. When someone betrays your trust in a calculated way, do you believe forgiveness is earned, or chosen regardless of apology? There isn't a single right answer. I chose boundaries first. Maybe forgiveness comes later. Maybe it doesn't. What I know is this: the accident didn't change my life. It revealed it. That's an important distinction. If that body in the river hadn't been misidentified, if I had simply come home from a routine client meeting, how long would the transfers have continued? How long would the narrative about my instability have grown legs? I don't let myself spiral in those hypotheticals anymore. But I acknowledge them. I also acknowledge something less dramatic. I am not the same woman who signed documents without reading them. I am not the woman who ignored late-night texts because trust felt more elegant than inquiry. I still believe in love. Let me be clear about that. But I believe in informed love now. The kind that coexists with awareness. The kind that asks, gently but firmly, show me. There's strength in that. And if you're in your 40s, or 50s, or beyond, and you think it's too late to redraw lines, it isn't. Reinvention doesn't require youth. It requires honesty. I still design living rooms. I still water herbs in the morning. The difference is subtle but profound. I own the house I stand in, legally and emotionally. No hidden clauses. No passwords tied to someone else's birthday. Just mine. Sometimes people ask if I regret walking into that wake instead of calling first. No. Because seeing it with my own eyes stripped away doubt. It wasn't polished. It wasn't mediated. It was raw truth in soft lighting and borrowed jewelry. And truth, however inconvenient, is steadier than illusion. If there's a moral here, it isn't leave at the first red flag. Life is more complex than slogans. It isn't trust no one. That's a lonely philosophy. It's this. Pay attention when your intuition whispers, even if the room is quiet. Ask questions before someone answers them for you. And never confuse longevity with loyalty. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Camera's voice travels. Self-respect is the one inheritance no one can quietly transfer away.